Hello, Taurus, and thank you for being here with me today. There is something quietly shifting around you right now, and before we go any further, I want you to really sit with this message instead of rushing past it. Because sometimes the universe does not arrive with noise or warning signs. Sometimes it begins returning things in silence, in the slow and grounded way Taurus has always understood what is real, through timing that feels natural, steady, and almost easy to overlook. And that is exactly why you may not notice it at first. Part of you has been waiting for something larger, something impossible to miss, some unmistakable sign that your season has finally changed. But while you wait for that dramatic moment, life begins placing things back into your hands through moments that seem too small to carry the meaning they actually hold. A conversation that softens a door inside you that has been closed for years. A familiar person returning with entirely different energy. A quiet realization that suddenly changes the way you have been carrying something for far too long. Have you ever felt that before? The strange sense that something you thought had disappeared completely was somehow finding its way back to you, slowly, almost carefully. And along with that feeling comes another one that is harder to explain, a hesitation before receiving, as if part of you still needs proof that you are allowed to accept something good before you can fully hold it. That is Taurus, and it is not weakness. It comes from years of surviving through endurance, through carrying more than you ever said out loud, through staying rooted even when the ground beneath you stopped giving back what you needed. Taurus rarely loses things through carelessness. More often, you set them aside quietly. A desire pushed deeper into yourself because it did not feel practical at the time. A need ignored because someone else seemed to need more. Words swallowed because keeping the peace felt easier than explaining the heaviness sitting in your chest. Over time, entire parts of you become softer, quieter, easier for everyone else to live around, until you no longer notice how much of yourself has been compressed just to keep life stable. And after enough time, this no longer feels like sacrifice. It starts feeling responsible, necessary, even loving in some ways. Maybe part of it is love. But there is a difference between giving because you truly want to and giving because you no longer know how to stop carrying everything alone. That is where the weight begins to settle deep inside Taurus. Because eventually, even someone this strong pauses long enough to realize there is a version of themselves they have not fully heard from in years. What Taurus feels is rarely dramatic. It is quieter than that. It feels like realizing there are desires buried so deeply beneath routine and responsibility that you no longer know whether they still belong to you. Words held inside so long they no longer come naturally anymore. Boundaries your body knew were necessary, but that were never fully placed. Not because you were afraid, but because maintaining stability around you always seemed more urgent than protecting what was happening within you. And the universe noticed every part of it, Taurus. Every quiet compromise, every time you kept holding something together long after it had already started wearing you down inside. Every moment you chose stability around you over the truth your own body had been trying to communicate in silence. There is something at work here that is not mystical in the sense of fantasy, but real in the way seasons are real, in the way the earth remembers what has been buried beneath it long after the surface appears still. Even when no one else could see the pressure you were carrying, your body remembered it. Your spirit remembered it. The exhaustion that settled into your shoulders, the heaviness you learned to normalize, the way you kept telling yourself to hold on a little longer, even when something inside you had already begun asking for rest. And eventually, a question begins rising from underneath all of that weight, a question you may never have fully allowed yourself to sit with before. What happens when life starts returning the energy, care, and pieces of yourself that you spent years setting aside? What happens when the things you buried beneath responsibility and endurance slowly begin making their way back toward you? For Taurus, this carries a particular emotional weight because receiving has never felt simple. To receive fully, you first have to recognize what still belongs to you after so much time spent surviving by minimizing your own needs. And that can feel unfamiliar at first, especially after years of convincing yourself that strength meant continuing no matter how tired you became. And maybe that is why this message is finding you now. Not after the feeling has already passed, but while something inside you is still shifting, while your body still recognizes the heaviness of what you have been carrying for far too long. There are moments in life when discomfort is not there to punish you, but to show you what no longer feels sustainable. This may be one of those moments. Sometimes the body understands long before the mind is ready to admit the truth. A certain exhaustion begins lingering in places rest alone cannot fix, and Taurus, deep down, can usually feel when something has reached its limit, even before there are words for it. In the comments, tell me this, Taurus. What is something you kept carrying long after it became too heavy, simply because you believed you had to? Write it below. Taurus has a deep relationship with stability, so deep that sometimes stability begins to feel more important than peace itself. But something can remain steady on the outside while quietly exhausting you underneath. Life understands this in ways that go far beyond appearances. Every need you buried, every desire you pushed further down, every time you stepped aside so someone else could feel secure, left an imprint, even when no one else noticed it happening. And after enough time passes, those silent compromises begin collecting weight inside the body, shaping the way you move through life without you fully realizing how much energy it has been costing you just to keep everything standing. Not because life is keeping score, but because energy does not disappear once it leaves your hands. It changes shape, it settles, and after enough time passes, it begins finding its way back. Think about a seed planted so long ago you forgot it existed, until one season the soil softens and something finally breaks through the surface. Not because the universe suddenly became generous, but because some returns are built quietly into the structure of life itself. Some things were always meant to come back once you became emotionally available enough to receive them without immediately pushing them away. And for Taurus, these returns rarely arrive in obvious ways. Sometimes what comes back is clarity you did not have before. Sometimes it is the strength to finally release what your body has been exhausted from carrying. Sometimes it is an opportunity that looks too small at first, because you have spent so long measuring value through sacrifice and survival that softness almost feels unfamiliar when it finally appears. Sometimes it is simply the realization that you no longer want to keep abandoning yourself just to preserve comfort for everyone else around you. And there is a very specific reason Taurus tends to underestimate these returns when they arrive. Taurus has spent so much time measuring value through usefulness that eventually it becomes automatic. If something arrives that seems meant only for you, something that does not immediately serve anyone else or help hold everything together, your first instinct is often hesitation. You pause before accepting it. You question whether it makes sense to let it in. Part of you quietly checks whether you have truly earned it before allowing yourself to receive it fully. And after enough years of living this way, even rest can start to feel unfamiliar, almost like something that must be justified before your body is allowed to soften into it completely. And this may be one of the quietest patterns Taurus carries, but also one of the heaviest. The same instinct that once protected you, that helped you survive difficult seasons and carry responsibilities without collapsing, can also become the very thing that blocks what is finally trying to reach you now. Because when you spend years filtering life through endurance, practicality, and obligation, you can slowly stop recognizing the difference between what truly drains you and what was actually meant to nourish you. You become so accustomed to holding tension in your body, pushing through exhaustion, and staying emotionally useful to everyone around you, that gentleness itself can begin to feel almost suspicious when it appears. Maybe that is what you are beginning to notice now. Not through some dramatic revelation, but through small moments that feel impossible to ignore once they appear. A realization your body has been trying to hand you for a long time. A quiet understanding that not everything entering your life needs to be justified through sacrifice before it is allowed to stay. Taurus often knows how to protect, provide, and preserve, but learning to receive without suspicion can feel unfamiliar after so many years spent surviving through self-reliance. There is a certain kind of loneliness that forms when you become the person everyone depends on while quietly forgetting how to lean on anything yourself. There is a rhythm to the way life returns things to you. It is not random, and it rarely arrives all at once. The first thing that usually returns is not the major opportunity or the recognition you once imagined. It begins somewhere smaller and more internal, which is exactly why it is so easy to overlook at first. A new clarity settles into you quietly. You look at a relationship, a decision, or a pattern you have carried for years, and suddenly something feels different, even though nothing outside you appears to have changed. Sometimes the shift is so subtle that all you notice at first is that your body no longer wants to keep enduring what it once tolerated without question. But something inside you has. Maybe only by a fraction, maybe only enough to loosen the grip you have kept on something for too long. And still, that small shift changes everything. After that clarity begins to settle in, circumstances start moving differently too. Opportunities appear at the exact moment Taurus becomes willing, even briefly, to stop resisting what feels supportive instead of merely familiar. And often, the unfamiliar part is not the opportunity itself, but the idea that you no longer have to suffer in order to deserve something good entering your life. A conversation finally happens because you stopped swallowing what needed to be said. A door opens the moment you stop assuming you need permission to walk through it. Someone enters your life at the same time you stop shrinking yourself to fit inside spaces that were already too small for who you were becoming. These moments are not random. They happen because something in you has started opening again. The version of you that spent years surviving through emotional restraint slowly begins allowing itself to take up space without immediately apologizing for it. Imagine a letter that should have reached you years ago but never quite arrived. Not because it was lost, but because emotionally you were living somewhere else. You were surviving inside routines, responsibilities, and versions of yourself built entirely around keeping everything stable for everyone else. And when you finally begin returning to your own needs, your own desires, your own boundaries that exist to protect rather than isolate, it is almost as if that letter finally finds the correct address, as though life has been waiting patiently for the moment you became present enough within yourself to actually recognize what was trying to reach you all along. This is how it happens for Taurus. The return was never truly absent. You were simply living too far away from yourself to recognize what was trying to reach you. But now, as you slowly reconnect with what feels honest, grounded, and fully yours, life begins finding a place to land inside you again. And the question that remains is one Taurus cannot avoid forever. When something arrives meant only for you, with no obligation attached to it, no need to justify its existence through service or sacrifice, will you finally allow yourself to open the door? That inner place where Taurus truly lives, beneath the routines, beneath the responsibilities, beneath the version of you that learned how to survive by holding everything together for everyone else, is what this entire message keeps circling back to. Because there is a difference between being dependable and disappearing inside your own usefulness. Taurus often becomes so focused on carrying, preserving, and maintaining that it slowly loses touch with what actually feels nourishing to the self underneath all that endurance. And when life finally begins asking you to reconnect with your own needs again, it can feel unfamiliar at first, almost like learning a language your spirit remembers but has not spoken in years. If you have been feeling that hesitation lately, that strange resistance when something good, supportive, or emotionally safe tries to enter your life, you are not imagining it. Sometimes the hardest thing for Taurus is not surviving difficult seasons. It is softening enough to receive without immediately preparing to repay, justify, or earn what is arriving. And maybe that is why this moment matters. Not because everything has already changed, but because something inside you is finally beginning to recognize what can no longer be carried the old way. Here is the contradiction Taurus rarely speaks about out loud. You know how to care for everyone around you with incredible precision. You remember what people need before they ask. You know how to create comfort, stability, warmth, and safety almost instinctively. But when life asks you what you need, when you are the one being invited to choose, something inside you hesitates. Not because you do not have desires, but because you have spent so much time placing them second that reaching for them no longer feels natural. Receiving asks something different from you than giving ever did. It asks you to remain present in your own center instead of stepping aside so everyone else can feel secure first. And Taurus learned this pattern gradually, over years of subtle emotional conditioning, through moments where being easy to depend on felt safer than fully expressing what was happening inside. Over time, your full presence began feeling like something that needed to be softened around others. Your needs became quieter. Your boundaries became more flexible than your spirit actually wanted them to be. And because Taurus dislikes creating instability, you became skilled at adjusting yourself before tension ever had the chance to surface. Slowly, almost without noticing, you learned how to become smaller in rooms that ask too much from you emotionally. And now, as life slowly begins returning things to you, Taurus is faced with something deeply unfamiliar. How do you stay fully present when something is finally being offered back to you? How do you receive without immediately feeling guilty for taking up space? There is often a silent belief inside Taurus that if something good comes toward you, then somewhere else there must be less left for someone else, as though receiving automatically creates imbalance. But life does not work that way. This is simply an old survival belief that settled so deeply into your system it started feeling like truth. The reality is that Taurus receiving what genuinely belongs to them takes nothing away from anyone else. In fact, the opposite begins happening. A Taurus that is no longer emotionally starving, no longer abandoning itself in silence, becomes more grounded, more honest, and more fully present in every relationship around them. Not because you are forcing yourself to give more, but because you are no longer afraid to let yourself exist fully inside your own life. And that changes everything about the energy you bring into the world. Your relationships become more truthful because you stop negotiating your own needs in silence. You stop shrinking yourself to preserve comfort for everyone else. You begin standing in your own shape without apologizing for the space your spirit naturally occupies. And there comes a moment in the life of Taurus when the old way of adjusting simply stops working. Not dramatically, not through chaos or sudden collapse. It happens quietly, almost internally at first. The same compromises that once felt normal begin sitting differently in your body. The same relationships that once felt stable begin asking for emotional energy you no longer have available in the same way. And the patterns you once carried automatically begin creating a heaviness inside yourself that can no longer be ignored. And because Taurus feels everything so deeply beneath the surface, eventually you begin noticing that something inside you has changed. The world may look the same. The people around you may still move in familiar ways, but your relationship to what you once tolerated no longer feels the same inside your body. It is like spending years trying to steady a heavy piece of furniture on uneven ground, only to suddenly realize the problem was never the object itself, but the foundation underneath it all. This moment is not collapse, it is not destruction, it is recognition. And sometimes, recognition feels more unsettling than confusion. Because once you truly see something, you cannot comfortably return to pretending you do not. Clarity asks something from you. It asks you to stop carrying what your spirit already knows has become too heavy. And Taurus, because it values stability so deeply, often has the instinct to return to what is familiar, even after realizing it no longer feels right. To keep enduring, to keep adjusting, to keep convincing yourself that if you hold everything carefully enough, maybe the exhaustion will eventually disappear on its own. But once the return has already begun, once life has started placing truth back into your hands, there becomes less and less room to escape what you now understand. The signs keep returning in different forms, through conversations, through moments of physical exhaustion, through relationships that no longer feel sustainable in the old way, through a quiet inner voice that keeps asking the same question beneath everything else. What are you going to do with what you know now? Because Taurus knows something now that cannot fully be buried again. There is a version of you that has been waiting outside your own life for far too long. A version of you with desires that were never fully spoken aloud. A voice that became too quiet after years of prioritizing everyone else's comfort before your own truth. A way of existing that no longer wants to shrink itself just to fit inside spaces that cannot hold your full presence. And the boundaries this version of you needs are not walls meant to isolate you from others. They are the natural shape of your spirit, the place where your energy ends and someone else's begins. And that version of you is knocking now. Not aggressively, not dramatically, but steadily, in the same way roots slowly push through hardened earth after a long season underground. And the real question underneath all of this is simple. When that part of you asks to finally be let in, will you open the door? Because what Taurus is moving through now is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to the self that became buried beneath years of survival, endurance, silence, and emotional self-control. Not the version of you built entirely around being dependable for everyone else, but the version that still carries its own needs, desires, limits, and truth underneath all of that weight. And maybe the deepest shift happening now is that you are finally beginning to realize you were never meant to carry everything forever. The universe was never keeping score against you. Life does not work that way. It is not waiting to decide whether you deserve rest, support, softness, or space before allowing those things to reach you. What life does is complete cycles. And Taurus has been living through a very long cycle of holding, enduring, staying, preserving, and giving far beyond the point of exhaustion. Now something is beginning to turn. And there is a quiet beauty in that, because Taurus understands consequence deeply. You understand the slow accumulation of pressure, the way small things build over time beneath the surface, long before anyone else notices them. The same sensitivity that once made you carry too much, the same awareness that made you absorb tension before it was spoken aloud, is also what allows you to recognize the return when it finally arrives, as long as you stop shutting the door before it can enter. Because the peace Taurus is being asked to create now is different from the stability you spent years protecting. It is not the calm that exists because everyone else is comfortable while you silently disappear inside yourself. It is the kind of peace that becomes possible when you stop negotiating your own worth behind closed doors. When you know what belongs to you emotionally and allow yourself to receive it without guilt. When your boundaries exist not to harden you, but to define you clearly enough that you no longer lose yourself inside other people's needs. The Taurus who receives is not becoming selfish. It is simply becoming whole. And there is something deep within you, something instinctive and ancient that recognizes the moment a person stops shaping themselves around the expectations of the world and finally begins allowing life to meet them where they truly are. That is what is happening now. The universe never forgot you, not once. Every quiet effort you made mattered. Every time you stayed silent when your spirit wanted to speak was felt somewhere beneath the surface of your life. Every moment you placed someone else at the center, while slowly stepping away from yourself, left its mark. And now something is beginning to shift again, slowly, steadily, with the same grounded timing that Taurus has always trusted when something is truly real. Keep your door open.